Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans from all over the world. Welcome back to another exciting, thrill-packed, information-loaded, and apologetic episode of Ask Chuck Dixon. Let's not waste any more of your precious time. I owe so many of you an apology. My deepest, I throw myself on the mercy of the court. I had a major continuity screw up, and you called me on it, and I thought you were wrong, and I was wrong. So this is my big apology tour here. Mike Partika asked a question that I answered last week about the Horseman, and he could I keep referring in these little shows of mine to the Horseman, Hector Caballero's sister as his sister-in-law, and I'm like, well, and so I came back at Michael and politely, but I fear condescendingly. I didn't mean to be that. If that's the way it came off, that he was wrong, that he didn't read the comic book right, that I was right, and that Patty is Hector's sister-in-law, not his sister. How could you get that wrong, Michael? You read the comic incorrectly. It's his sister-in-law. Well, it turns out somewhere along the line, I began thinking of her as a sister-in-law, although I had initially written Patty as Hector's sister. So, according to legend, this is how Wonder Girl was created. So, some sort of miscommunication. So Michael and a few others emailed me at brunobookstore.com, and they had the receipts. They had the panels right out of the book. And, in which Hector is clearly referring to Patty as his sister. And so that kind of threw me for a loop. Threw me into a little bit of a panic, because I'm like, but did I refer to her later on as the sister-in-law? And we're looking into that at Rippaverse. It turns out, at first glance, at first scan, I may have only referred to Patty as the sister-in-law in stories that have not yet appeared. So we can change them. And we're looking to change, if we find any places where these things need to be changed, we'll fix it in digital, and then later print editions will correct the record, as it were. Fortunately, Danny is still his nephew either way. So that works out. But yeah, man, you folks called me on it, and I have to. I'm not apologizing for making the continuity error. I just did it. I mean, I think if Horseman was a monthly comic and I was working on it month after month after month, that little detail might have become more firmly established in my mind. But because Horseman is like a series of graphic novels or a series of event comics, I'm not making apologies for myself. I'm just explaining how that might have happened. Somehow, in the hiatus between writing two Horseman stories, I began to think of Patty as the sister-in-law. Probably because she just doesn't look like Hector at all. They don't look like siblings. But my oldest sister didn't look like anybody in the family. So things like that can happen. So anyway, again, my apologies to Michael, apologies to the rest of you, and I will work harder to get it right in the future. But apparently, we can fix this, and there's no harm, no foul. So let's move on to another question. I hope I get right. John Bua. You mentioned comics being cinematic many times. This was first brought to my attention with Mark Millar's Ultimates. They kept talking about how it being widescreen cinema. Now that got me thinking about comics at the time, and I drew the conclusion that comics are less like film and more like theater. I know that is not true either, as comics are, well, comics. I do similarities between both, one of which I will expand on in my next question. I didn't take your next question. Sorry, John. I always look at Will Eisner's The Spirit as a play rather than a movie. So what's your take? Do you view comics to be more cinema-like or more play-like? Well, plays are, I guess the most ancient form of, except for storytelling, the most ancient form of public entertainment. And plays are restricted to largely the stage. The action all takes place within the proscenium arch, and the play, the way the play is staged, has to work within those restrictions. So the play director's job is to make sure that you're looking where he needs you to be looking. Okay, and that's a true talent. Working with the cast, working with how they blocked it out, scenery, set design, all the rest of it. They are making sure you're getting the story. That you're not just sitting there in the theater, looking around the set while everybody's talking. I mean, the real crux of the talent behind putting together a play is to make sure that you sort of forget that you're watching just a bunch of people on a stage pretending to be other people. That the play takes on a life of its own. It takes on a reality of its own. And they do all the hard work for you as an audience member to draw you into that reality and, present the story to you, with clarity and depth and emotion and all those other things. But there is that restriction. It is your singular point of view as an audience member looking at this play. And, you can get distracted by a Tiffany lamp in the back of the set and maybe lose track of what's going on in the play itself. So you have a lot of options as an audience member at a play that you don't have when you watch a movie. You don't have those options. Your point of view is at the mercy of the director, of the filmmakers. You are being shown what is important to see. You don't really have a choice, because the camera can move anywhere. The camera is practically a character in the movie. The camera represents you. What your viewpoint is, and the filmmakers are showing you what you need to see, or what they feel you need to see, or what they feel needs to be emphasized on what's important. And the same thing with comics. In comics, the camera moves around. The camera is placed wherever the artist determines it needs to be to get the point of each panel across. The only equivalent, the nearest equivalent I can think of to a play would be like a comic strip like Dilbert or Peanuts, where it's one view generally. It's just one. The characters are within the panel, and the panel serves as the proscenium arch. The panel is the stage, and Schultz didn't do a whole lot of camera work. He didn't. It's not cinematographic for the most part. Sometimes some of the Sundays are. Some of the Sundays are very, but the daily strip generally is You know, generally it's always 4 panels, and that's your stage, and he works within that stage. But you know, comic books, graphic novels, even some of the classic newspaper comic strips of the 30s, 40s, and 50s are highly cinematographic. They're borrowing techniques from film, and as I said in a previous broadcast, movies borrowed from comics as well, and this needs to be more firmly established because the comic book medium, the comic strip medium, the sequential art medium, to get fancy about it, was evolving at the same time as film. And so you have these two languages, these two mediums that are growing up together and experimenting and trying different things and all the rest, and looking for new ways to thrill their audiences, new ways to get the story across, exploring the limitations of their craft. And so we get the sort of melding between the two. And it really, I mean, movies moved away from the proscenium arch. They moved away from theater. I mean, if you see early silent films, I mean very early silent films, they're very much like film plays. You know, there was restrictions of budget and other things. There was lots of restrictions on them, and the cameras were so freaking huge. But very, very quickly, I mean, not that long into the history of cinema, we begin to see them start to move the camera, start to come up with different ways of doing things, you know, extraordinarily clever ways of doing things, and, you know, pushing back against the restrictions of the medium. And the same thing for comics. The comics audiences, I mean, the best comic book creators and comic strip creators, I'm talking about, you know, Milton Caniff and Will Eisner and, you know, Frank Robbins and people like that. They knew their audience was sophisticated. They knew their audience was learning this language of comics along with them as they were creating it. And, you know, Carl Barks, John Stanley, they had respect for their audience. And so we're continually pushing the boundaries of what could be done creatively, and trying to deliver a new experience to the reader all the time. These were consummate professionals. These were passionate creators, very, very cognizant of the fact that they had to keep the work fresh. And a lot of times they looked to film. I don't think very many of them looked to plays because there was nothing to learn there. For this kind of medium. And again, I mean, comics are an immediate experience, more so than any other medium. Every panel has to have an impact. Every image has to delight or inspire or engage or you know, create suspense or whatever. And so yeah, I don't think there's a lot in theater. Because theater, I mean, I you know, theater is also in a way an immediate experience because you're right there. You're with the people. You're with the characters in the same room, literally. So in a way, that's an immediate experience as well, but not in this very, very special and intimate way that comics are. So I don't know if I made that clearer or muddier, but we're going to move on anyway. Ulysses, he says, I picked up the Batman Black and White Compendium. Wow, what a treat. I didn't know there was a compendium. One of the stories in it is written by you and drawn by Jorge Zaffino. It's a great short story about Batman doing excellent detective work. Man, I'm becoming a black and white comics convert. I think they may be better than color comics. My question is, what was it like working on this anthology, and what was the idea behind DC doing a bunch of black and white Batman stories? I think it was inspired by Mark Chiarello, and Mark was, you know, he was behind this. He was the mastermind behind doing this one. And I don't know what his inspiration was, but, you know, if you were around for comics in the 80s, there was like this black and white explosion. Eventually, we call it the black and white glut because I think largely caused by the success of Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles, which originally appeared in black and white. And black and white comics are obviously cheaper to produce. And it became sort of a thing for a few years to do black and white comics. And this came out years later, but I think maybe that was put the idea in Chiarella's head. The other thing is Mark working in the DC offices, he saw a lot of black and white artwork. I mean, artwork's coming in by these people, and there's you would go up to DC and there'd be original artwork lying everywhere, and of course it's all in black and white. And I think maybe he thought, hey, let's see what some of these people can do, because you had some extraordinarily talented people who could really show off their skills in black and white without the color, not masking, but just without that extra layer, and you could really see the art. And Batman kind of leans toward the noirish, so it was probably a great idea to do a black and white story. Now, I had done a lot of work with Jorge Zaffino, and Zaffino stuff should always be in black and white, in my opinion, because color doesn't really add that much to it. It's all there. And Chiarella was a big Zaffino admirer. We talked a number of times, geeking out over what a genius Jorge was. And but how I've told the story before. I mean, how I ended up in the black and white anthology, how Jorge and I ended up there, was I was not initially invited to be a part of Batman Black and White. I was kind of left out. I mean, I was working on a lot of Batman titles. There was plenty of Batman stuff coming out from me at DC. And maybe that was Mark's thinking, Chuck's got enough work. He's got enough exposure. Let's give some other writers who've never had a shot at Batman a shot. But when all was said and done, Mark realized that of all of these Batman stories, no one had done a mystery. No one had done a story in which Batman is a detective, for various reasons. And so he called me on the phone and said, do you think that you and Jorge would like to do a 8-pager for Batman Black and White? And I really need a mystery story. I really need a whodunit. And I said, yeah, I mean, as long as I can think of a whodunit that works, we'll do that. And I had recently read an article about, I don't mean to bore people because I've talked about this recently, but I had recently read an article about how police had solved the case by determining that the body, the fingerprints that they had seen were from a hand that had been frozen. It was not the hand of a live person. So they were being thrown off the case by a ruse using a frozen hand. And I read further into this and found out that there was a mob, I think they were Russians, and they were keeping hands on ice for this purpose, to throw the cops off by having fingerprints show up on weapons and other places, to throw the cops off and have the cops looking for someone who was long dead, actually long dead. They were never going to find the person that they were looking for, and the guilty party would get away. And in the article, they mentioned that the cops were able to determine this, or the forensics people were able to determine this, because when human flesh freezes, it shrinks. And the fingerprints were shrunken. They were smaller than they would normally be on a, because they didn't match the fingerprints on record they had for the person they thought they were looking for. They were like, well, why are these fingerprints smaller than the ones we have on record? And it's like, because this hand had been frozen solid. And I thought, whoa. I'm keeping that little gem in the back of my head. I'd make a great resolution to a mystery. And then I think like a month or two later, along comes Mark Chiarello saying, I need a mystery. And there we have it. That was my MacGuffin. That was my hook. And yeah, the story turned out very well. Jorge did it in like record time. He really, because the deadline was creeping up for that issue of Batman Black and White. Because Batman Black and White initially appeared as, I think a four issue miniseries in prestige format, if I remember correctly. So yeah, that's how that happened. All right. JD the Comic Otaku. I came across a blog by the DC Comics that said something that says your most Bat title inputs in 2 different time periods. What are your thoughts on this, and is it right? And here is that entry on some blog post. For a time in the 1990s and the early 2000s, Chuck Dixon's name across the DC line was practically ubiquitous. There's a word for you all to look up. To verify peak Dixon, however, I had to go through his entire publishing history to compare his credits for each month of his career. My findings are that we reach critical mass on Dixon's Bat titles twice in his career, with 7 credits across those months. April 1997 is Robin, Nightwing, Detective Comics Annual, Robin Annual, Batman Chronicles, and Batman Wildcat. And July 2001, Robin, Nightwing, Birds of Prey, Legends of the Dark Knight, Gotham Knights, Nightwing, The Target, and Nightwing, Our Worlds at War. Now, let's go to April 1997 first. I differ somewhat with the findings. I went to Grand Comic Books Database and a couple of other sites and looked up what I had out in April 1997. And yes, Batman Wildcat, Birds of Prey, Revolution, which was a one-shot, my regular issue of Detective Comics, my regular issue of Green Arrow, my regular issue of Nightwing, my regular issue of Robin. So that is 6 books rather than 7. But also in that month appeared Code of Honor from Marvel, which was part of a 4-issue miniseries I was doing for them. So that is 7 titles that month, but I only found 6 that were at DC. Now, if we go to July 2001, we've got Legends of the Dark Knight, Birds of Prey, Nightwing, Robin, Nightwing the Target, Nightwing Our Worlds at War, and Gotham Knights. I didn't see Batman Chronicles issue in here at all in either month. But also, in addition, that month to these 7 titles is Marvel Knights number 15, which I think was my last issue of Marvel Knights. So that's 8 titles for that month. Now, you go, hey, Chuck, that's crazy. You wrote 2 comics a week. It's not necessarily how it worked out, but yeah, I guess, at some point I had to have written 2 comic books a week for a few weeks to get this done, to reach this level of work. But if you were to go, these weren't even, these were my busiest months at DC, not my busiest months overall. When I was writing all 3 titles of The Punisher at once, we're probably going to get to 9 or 10 titles in those months, if you combine Marvel and DC together. So yeah, I was a writing fool for about about 12 years there, just cranking stuff out, having fun, enjoying every minute of it. But a lot of time at the keyboard, and the rest of the time thinking about going to the keyboard. But when they're calling, when the phone's ringing, it ain't going to ring forever. You got a window in comics, and I was aware of that from the beginning. And I was going to take advantage. As long as I was in demand, I was going to go for it. And I'm still busy today, but nowhere near as busy as I was at what that blog referred to as peak Dixon. Twin Spin! JD, the comic otaku, is back with also, what are your thoughts of DC Comics being under Netflix's thumb will affect or not your royalties from those previous works? I don't think it'll affect the royalties because I think my contracts will continue. One would hope Netflix wouldn't try anything funny. If anything, I would be looking forward to more royalties because I would think Netflix would step up production on some of this stuff. They certainly have the... I don't know if they have the cash anymore. And the thing is, the Warner Brothers sale still isn't final. I'm still hearing that, what's that other outfit? Trying to, Skyhook or whatever their name is, trying to pick up Warner's. So it's still in contention. But either way, whoever ends up owning Warner's, I would imagine would leave, DC Comics royalty calculations to themselves, unless who's ever running DC decides to ingratiate themselves to their new masters, as Dan DiDio did, and renegotiate the royalty program. Dan DiDio renegotiated with Warner's, or more or less bowed to their will, and gave away a lot of money that would have gone into freelancers' accounts. There's DC's still good about paying royalties, far better than Marvel, far better than Marvel, but they were a lot better pre-DiDio because he kind of gave away the store. He allowed them to move the goalposts on when the amount of royalties paid from Warner's to DC, and I hope that we don't have a repeat of that, where whoever is in charge of DC now doesn't genuflect to Netflix and allow them to reduce our royalty payments, because that would not be good for an awful lot of people, an awful lot of creators. But then, as I said, I mean, maybe Netflix will step up production on stuff, and we'll see more royalties from ancillary things like animation and all the rest of it. And I would not mind seeing a different deal on animation, because the deal with Warner's animation is they give you a one-time payment for using your character. It's like, okay, he appeared in this episode, let's say Bane appeared in this episode of Batman, the Animated Adventures, and if he appears in 6 more, you don't get any more money. You don't get any more money until he appears again in a new series. So when he shows up in Teen Titans Go, yes, you get another payment. But if he shows up in Teen Titans Go 10 more times, no, you don't. You don't get any more. So it's not like true residuals. It's like a one-time, payment, and it's not that big. It's not a lot of money in animation. The profit margins in animations are slim. I understand that, but they could throw us a little bit more of a bone if they're going to use these characters, because then these episodes run endlessly on television, and like in a normal residual situation, you would see money every time that episode was broadcast, but that's not the deal. So, and of course, streaming throws that all off because they're not broadcast at all. So, anyway, we'll see what happens. Who knows? They're in charge. All of us creators are at their mercy. There's not a whole lot we can do. Because you can't go to war with these people, because, as I've often said, they have lawyers hanging on hooks waiting for jerks to sue them. So I shall wait and see, as will the rest of us. Okay, JD the Comic Otaku is back. I should have given you a triple spin and I didn't. I am failing everyone recent weeks. Anyway, I owe you a triple spin. Also, if you were to write a Marvel Civil War in the thousands, how would you make it different? Whom would be the victors in your version? I wouldn't do it at all. I just thought Civil War was sort of a dopey idea. The good guys versus the good guys. I didn't want to see that. And I wouldn't do it. So there's your short answer. Maybe that's why I didn't give you a triple spin. Maybe that question wasn't worthy. I joke. I kid because I love. Okay, next question. Thomas Pellegrino. After reading the Enfield Gang Massacre by Chris Condon, reading the Jimmy Palmiotti Jonah Hex series, and watching John Ford's Stagecoach for the first time, I was thinking about jumping into Cormac McCarthy. Which of his novels should I read first? Well, I gotta say, if your experience with Westerns is limited to a novel I've never heard of, and the writing of Jimmy Palmiotti, and one viewing of Stagecoach, you need to broaden your Western horizons. You need to read more Westerns. So, I'm gonna have to look for that novel. That I had not heard of that one. I began McCarthy with All the Pretty Horses, and how I began McCarthy was I was at a Punisher Summit meeting with Stephen Grant and Larry Hama, and of course Don Daly and Tim Toohey, who were our editors. And Hama brought up that Cormac McCarthy, and he said that Cormac McCarthy wrote violence better than any writer he'd ever read. And so when the summit broke up in the afternoon and I was staying in New York for the night, I immediately ran down to the Mysterious Bookshop because I thought, well, I don't know who this Cormac McCarthy guy is, but I assume if he's writing about violence and Larry didn't mention Westerns, he must be a mystery writer. And they never heard of him at the Mystery Bookshop. They didn't know who Cormac McCarthy was. And I'm like, well, then who is Cormac McCarthy? So I went to like a real bookstore. Well, not Mysterious Bookshop is a real bookstore, but I went to an awesome bookstore. But I went to like a normal chain bookstore, and there were Cormac McCarthy books. And I just pulled this one out of All the Pretty Horses. That's okay. This guy writes really violent stuff, and he wrote a book called All the Pretty Horses. I got to see what this is about. And if Hama suggested it, I want to know about it. And I brought the book home, didn't read it, and then got invited to San Diego Con, and I took this book along. And I started it as the plane took off, and I finished it before we landed, and I was totally wrapped up in the whole thing. So, I mean, your mileage may vary on Cormac McCarthy, but this is a good one to start. I would not start with Blood Meridian. I would not start with some of his earlier novels. Suttree. I am trying to get through Suttree. I cannot get through Suttree. So some of his earlier novels, I would not really go near. Blood Meridian, yeah, after you've read a few McCarthys and you get a taste for what this guy's about, then go into Blood Meridian. But I read All the Pretty Horses, then No Country for Old Men, The Road, and there's one other I read before I read Blood Meridian, and before I tried to delve into some of his earlier stuff. But this is a good one to start on. And it's kind of a Western. It's kind of a Western set, I believe, in the 1940s. But it's got all the Western elements. And it's a good one. I mean, I think with this book, McCarthy is beginning to explore other genres. His other books are kind of themselves. He's writing like Faulkner type novels about the American South and stuff like that. And some of it gets pretty dark. And Blood Meridian, yes, it is a Western, but it's not it's not really even like a genre. It's hard to describe. It's not like a genre western, but with All the Pretty Horses, I think he begins to like think in terms of pulp almost. Although the stuff isn't pulp, it's very very literate. Um, you know, but he's eschewing some of his wordiness and things like that from before. He's just becoming a better writer. I think I'm speaking for the guy, and he's spinning in his grave somewhere because I'm speaking for him. But I think he had reached a point in his writing where he wanted to just concentrate on the writing, to just pare it down and see what he could do, and just exploring his craft. And to do that, he turned to genre writing, where there wasn't as much heavy lifting to be done. There was a certain expectation. If you're writing a post-apocalyptic novel, or you're writing a crime novel, or you're writing a Western novel, a lot of your work has been done for you because you're in a genre. There are certain expectations, and he was going to, you know, exceed those expectations and push those genres, and you know, that framework, that platform allowed him to just write. And I know that feeling. Right? I just want to write. You know, I wish I had a plot line to start today so I could just start writing. You know, and I think that's what was going on with him. Not to speak for the man, but that's just my theory, because everything he wrote, I haven't read his last two novels. But everything he wrote in that period, in the period in which he became a best-selling author and became famous, more famous than just Larry Hama suggesting him to people, you know, these are all genre novels. You know, things that would have been unexpected. You know, if you were an early fan of Cormac McCarthy, you would not have expected these books from him. They were like more popular entertainment, but they're far more challenging. And I don't mean challenging to read; they're page turners, but they're far more challenging in concept and everything else than normal genre writing. You know, this ain't James Patterson. You know, these ain't Louis L'Amour westerns. These are something else. These are books you're going to put down and think about. And I can't tell you how many of these I read in one sitting, and that's a rarity for me because I get distracted. You know, I was younger, I could sit down and read a book cover to cover, no problem. But you know, as you know, life goes on, and you know, real life, grown up stuff enters your life. It's hard to carve out the time to just sit and read a book all day. But when I get one of his, that's what I'm doing all day. Except Suttree, man, I cannot get my way through that one. But anyway, that's where I think you should start, just from my own experience. Twin spin. Thomas is back with, also, what do you think of Louis L'Amour novels? I mentioned Louis L'Amour. My dad was a big Western reader. Always had a paperback Western with him at work. I remember when we would go down to the Jersey Shore on vacation, as soon as we put the luggage in the room, his first stop was at the newsagent to pick up a bunch of paperback Westerns to read while we were on vacation. And I started reading some of the ones he was reading, and like so many people, because Louis L'Amour was really starting to blow up in the mid to late 60s, he and I both read these Louis L'Amour books. He would buy them, and then I would read them. And I enjoyed them well enough, and I noticed he stopped buying them, and I kind of lost interest as well, because they weren't, they were just kind of like a bowl of pretzels, you know? Yeah, they'll fill you up, but, you know, you don't want to eat them for 3 meals a day. I think my dad had the same problem I had, because we really had exactly the same taste in Westerns. We liked the same Westerns 100%. And I think we thought these things were a little too clean. They weren't mean enough. There was a similarity. The characters were a little shallow. There wasn't a lot to them. They were like, as much as my dad and I loved the TV westerns, these were like TV westerns on paper, and there were far more challenging authors to read, for authors, which I'll talk about in the next question, authors more to our taste than Louis L'Amour. But you can't argue with the guy's success. I mean, he wrote and sold a whole lot of books, still sells a whole lot of books. He's still, when, the average person walking around thinks of a Western author, they think of Louis L'Amour, because he was so incredibly prolific. And I'm not going to take anything away from the guy, but they just weren't what I was looking for in a Western. They weren't what my dad was looking for in a steady diet, the way we were consuming them. I mean, you're reading 4 or 5 Westerns a week, You're looking for something. You still want to read Westerns, but you're looking for something a little different, something with a little more grit to it. Triple spin. We got a triple spin going. And Thomas is back with, who is your favorite Western novel writer, and what is your favorite Western comic book? I tell you, a guy I turn to over and over and over again, and is Gordon D. Sheriffs. And he was prolific. He wrote a whole bunch of paperbacks, a lot of them for gold medal. And I first ran into him. My dad picked up a book called Apache Hunter. And after he was done reading it, I read it, and it was mean. It was mean, and it really got... how Louis L'Amour will tell you how scary and frightening the Apaches are. Well, Gordon D. Sheriffs, basically, took that further, really, really established the Apaches as, Red Devils, just, barbaric and nasty and frightening and all the rest of it. Apache Hunter, really blew me away. And I started looking for other books. And, after a while, I moved on to other genres and things like that. I wasn't reading as many Westerns. But recently, I got back into it and started looking for Gordon D. Sheriff's novels. And I think now I own every single paperback he's ever written. And, my early estimation of how good a writer this guy was has been firmly established now that I've read, in some cases reread, a dozen or more of these things. This guy wrote with an authority about the Southwest, Big Bend, Texas area, New Mexico, Arizona, the border region. Wrote with a real authority. I don't know anything about Gordon D. Sheriffs. He must have lived in the area for some time. For his descriptions are really vivid. As Louis L'Amour's descriptions are vivid, but his characters are meaner, more self-interested. The stories are more violent. I find them far more suspenseful. And also with sheriff's novels, you're never quite sure how things are going to turn out in the end. Maybe the hero doesn't get to ride off into the sunset, but I really like them. They're quick, nasty reads, and very much adult westerns. By that I don't mean any kind of sexual content or anything like that, but they're grown-up stories about what feels like real people, real three-dimensional characters that you grow to either care about or fear. Now, a lot of Gordon D. Sheriff's novels are available reprinted and on Kindle from the same people that published my Levon K novels. But I'm sort of a geek. I want to read the original paperbacks, kind of because it reminds me of my dad. It kind of takes me back while I'm reading the book. I'm reading the book and having this other experience of in the past. And particularly, I love the Gold Medal books. Gold Medal was a hell of a paperback publisher back in the 50s and through the early 60s. I don't know who was editing these books, but he was a genius, because all the westerns, all the crime stories and everything else are uniformly excellent. They had a very high standard at Gold Medal for lowbrow entertainment. But the Sheriffs is a guy. You could take any one of these and make it into a movie without changing anything, and it would be a classic Western, a fantastic Western. So that, and there are others, Forrest Carter and Claire Huffaker and other, but this is a guy that I've been reading a lot of recently, and needs to be better known. Now, as far as Western comics, I mean, 90% of you already know my answer. Tex Willer, it's an Italian comic book series. It's been around for 75 years, and it's the best Western comic ever. Drawn by some of the greatest artists in Europe and South America. And I was honored and to be able to write 3 Tex Willer stories for Benelli Publishing, because it took me like almost 20 years of wheedling and taking advantage of contacts and everything else to convince Mauro Boselli at Benelli to give me a shot at a Tex story, and he graciously bought 3 scripts from me. So always proud of that. But that's not the reason. I just love Tex Willer. It's just awesome stuff if you get to check it out. Epicenter Comics. I'm providing a link to Epicenter in the links below. Epicenter Comics is republishing a lot of Tex material and other great Italian comics in English for the first time, including one of mine. So you need to check that out. A quadruple spin. We haven't had one of these in weeks. Wow. Thomas is back with, where can I find your Tex Willer story? Well, that's a coincidence. We were just talking about that. The Tex Willer, it's called Cinnamon Wells is my graphic novel, like European album story of Tex Willer. And it is available in English in the author collection, Volume 1. I can't wait for Volume 2. And in this collection, you get 6 European-style albums in a beautiful slipcase for a really nice price. And fantastic stories. Artwork by Serpieri and Alfonso Font and Enrique Breccia. I mean, some real... If you like Western comics, this is the cream of the crop. This is the tippy top. This stuff is fantastic. This is an awesome set. And you can also use it to work out. You can do curls with this set and become a better man in just 2 weeks. Anyway, it's just a hell of a set. And it's still available. And there's a link. They do all this through crowdfunding and then eventually do retail. But you can still participate in the crowdfund and look at a whole bunch of the rest of their terrific offerings in the link that I'm providing below. So the campaign for it is over, but in fact, I didn't even find out about this till the campaign was over. Campaign is over, but you can still pick it up. David Jordan, frogmen and underwater stuff are cool. You ever wanted to write something in that vein, like an underwater base type deal, like Jerry Anderson team in comics? Yeah, I mean, G.I. Joe, I got to do a bit of stuff with submarines, as I talked about in recent weeks. And that's some of my favorite stuff I got to do in G.I. Joe. Because the underwater stuff fascinates me. I'm no kind of scuba diver. I'm not a very strong, even a strong swimmer. But that stuff, is just as fascinating as, outer space kind of stuff. And I remember, Sea Devils when I was a kid. Undersea Agent, which was a short run series from Tower, I picked up. I don't really remember much about them other than Gil Kane did some stories, and Ray Bailey, an underrated comic book artist, used to assist Milton Caniff, did a lot of stories in here, and and then even more fondly, I remember the Frogmen stories that would appear in DC War Comics. And they would have this Frogman character who never had a name. And I just assumed he was always the same guy when I read the stories. And, Kubert drew some of them, but the best ones were, not that Kubert wasn't great, but the best Frogman stories were Russ Heath, who I think actually did scuba diving and stuff, so he really knew what he was drawing. And I would always look forward when I was a kid if they would include one of these Frogman stories, unnamed Frogman stories, in one of the books. So I've always kind of been fascinated by that stuff. And of course, Namor. I'd love to write a Namor thing. Graham and I pitched a Fantastic Four and Namor miniseries to Marvel years ago, and they ho-hummed us right out of the room. And I love the submarine movie genre, which I've talked about a number of times here. I mean, that's just underwater and space. I mean, you have immediate tension because you have people in a hostile environment, an environment that could kill them in seconds. A couple of things go wrong and everybody's dead. And I really dig the submarine genre, and have since I was a little kid, Frogman genre as well. I remember repeat showings on our local ABC affiliate of the Frogmen, the Richard Widmark movie about early, basically Navy SEALs in World War II. If you ever get a chance to see, that's a great movie. But I mean, I don't know what I would do, but if someone said, "Hey Chuck, we want to do an underwater thing," I'd be like, "Okay, yeah, let's do that." But I don't have any ready ideas to throw out. I don't have any, other than that Submariner Fantastic Four pitch. I don't really have anything I've ever prepared as relates to going under the sea. Brandon Woodall. I know Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created Mutants largely as a convenient way to give characters powers, and it wasn't until Chris Claremont's run that Marvel leaned into mutants as an allegory for oppressed minorities. These days, that allegory is basically all they're used for, with little to no subtlety. Controversial take, but I don't think the mutant oppression metaphor really works, because superpowers change the equation. Mutants can fight back. The fear of them is framed as ignorance, yet realistically, people would have justified concerns. A bar fight between two normal people wouldn't level a city block, one between mutants might. So given that, how would you handle the idea of people randomly being born with superpowers? Well, I've made my disdain for the X-Men clear here over and over and over again. Even as a kid, I didn't like the X-Men. I stopped buying it. I stopped buying a comic by Jack Kirby because I just found them to just be whiny and uninteresting. And I think the convenience of having them born with superpowers, I found boring because their origin ends with their birth. I preferred things like Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, where the origins were kind of ongoing. These characters were still exploring their powers and still working out how to exist, and even resenting their powers, like the Thing, and being inconvenienced by this, particularly Spider-Man, inconvenienced by this quote unquote gift he was given of spider abilities, or whatever these powers were that he had. And I preferred that as opposed to a bunch of entitled weirdos who resented, these abilities that they had been born with. And then we get to, Claremont, and now, as you say, it's an allegory, and I think it's a failed allegory. It's an allegory with a dismal view of humanity, where at a moment's notice we will all form a mob to attack the other, and we don't see that in real life. I mean, look, we have mobs protesting in the street in various American cities, and they've got to be paid to show up. I mean, there's just not enough. There's a greater demand for hate than there is a supply in this country. We're sort of evolved past all of these differences for the most part. I mean, look, you had the Salem witch trials, and today you got people cosplaying in pagan rituals in the woods. It's like a carnival act. And everybody's like, okay, that's odd, but all right, and next week we're gonna have a pie eating contest. So it's it's just a dismal view of humanity to think that we're just waiting to form. We're waiting to grab our pitchforks and torches and storm the castle at any given moment at something that we fear or don't understand. And let's face it, there are mutants among us, and most of them are celebrated. They're celebrated for their differences. You know, they have powers we don't have, and we're not even jealous of them. We're like, that's cool. I wish I was that guy. And we're cheering these people on because they can do stuff we can't do. And they are other, but they're an other that we admire. And we admire them for their otherness. And I think if you had a guy with wings, and a chick that could move stuff, the Beast would be a superstar in real life. He wouldn't be, hunted down and shunned by society. That's just silly. And I think what it comes down to is it's like a high school view of life. That if you feel that that's what humanity is like, and humanity has its flaws. I'm not saying we're all perfect. And in some societies, I'm talking about American society. In some societies, yeah, this stuff happens. Let's go over and that woman did something I don't like. Let's go throw stones at her till she dies. Yeah, that stuff happens. And you'll see like mass crazy, riots and demonstrations and protests and just plain massacres of masses of people. You'll see these horrible things happening in other countries. And they don't happen here anymore because we've sort of grown up as a society. So to say that everybody would be hounding the mutants into obscurity. No, they would be superstars. They would be celebrities on TV, and there would be merchandising. But what I mean by the high school mentality is because high school, unless you wind up in prison or join the military, high school for most of us is the last time you're going to have no freedom of association. You're going to be forced to spend all day for most of the year with a bunch of people you normally would not associate with. That and yeah, you're going to find some friends and some people that you can hang out with. But for the majority, these are people you would not want to be around, did not choose to be around, and will never be around with again in your life. So you're going to be in with a mix of people that you normally would not have anything to do with. So you're going to have and if you're any one of these people, I apologize, but you can have your jock bullies, and you're going to have your basic morons, and abusive types, and just strange types, and everything else. And you're going to have all these people in a mix, and they're not going to get along. And there's going to be, prejudicial hatred and abuse and everything else, because you're going to be mixing with people who are the products of their own home life and everything else. You're going to be in with a diverse crowd. I don't mean diverse race, ethnicity, religion. I mean diverse personalities, and then and you can't get away from them because you got to go to school by law, unless your parents are wise enough to homeschool you. So you're sort of stuck with this group like you would be in the military or in prison. But in military and prison, well, military more than prison, there's a sense of order. So, you can't have a bunch of abuse. In prison, it's all abuse. But in high school, you can be a victim, or you're trying to cruise through unnoticed, or you're one of the aggressors, or whatever. There's a hierarchy and all these different hierarchies, and it's this complex society. And it's largely unpleasant. It's largely unpleasant. And but the thing is, you leave high school and you never have to see those people again, and you're never going to be in that situation again. You have freedom of association. Yeah, you might run into a jerk you work with, but you can leave that job. You can quit that job, or he can get fired. But the hierarchy of high school no longer exists. Like you're making your own path now, and you don't have to put up with that crap. So, and and that's what I mean. I mean, if you remain in a high school frame of mind, you're going to have a rotten view of humanity. I mean, I used to work at a 7-Eleven graveyard shift. I worked from 11 at night till 7 in the morning, and boy, that'll give you a really rotten view of humanity. But I knew better. I knew, hey, the sun comes up and the zombies go back to bed. And the world is okay now. It's sunshiny. Those weird people you saw last night are gone, back to their lairs, and the normal people have taken over the world again. So, anything can give you a jaundiced view. And I kind of think, well, did Chris Claremont have like a really hard time in high school? Or was it just Chris Claremont was just digging in? I got this hook, this concept, and I'm just going to lean into that hard. And that might have been it. Might have been a creative decision. But, I mean, we had mutants in high school. We had this kid, this isn't him, and this isn't anybody. This is an AI image created by Grok. I just asked it to draw me a high school nerd, and it did. But we had a kid in our school, and he was weird. He was strange. But we didn't abuse him. Nobody abused him or anything else. I mean, very odd guy. And I tell you how odd, he talked to himself because no one else would talk to him. And he dressed kind of weird. And at lunchtime in junior high anyway, we had like an outside area. And after we ate lunch, we could go to this like outside area and just kind of hang out on these like concrete benches and stuff. And he would get up on this concrete table and tap dance. And everybody thought it was fun and funny. And some of the meaner kids would throw money at him. They'd throw coins at his feet, which he would then collect. And nobody knew anything about this kid because nobody ever talked to him. And he was off to himself. And I don't even know what classes he was in. But when high school came along, we had a computer lab. And we never saw this guy again because he was in the computer lab all day long. The whole school day. He was in that computer. He never went to, I never saw him in a class. Rarely saw him in the hallways. Never saw him in the cafeteria again. He was in that computer lab. And about 3 months out of high school, this is 1972. I was at a party with some other kids that I went to school with, house party, and somebody said, "Hey, did you hear about so and so?" I don't want to use his name. Did you hear about so and so? And I'm like, "What? Well, what about him?" They said IBM hired him out of high school. He's making $35,000 a year to start. Now this is 1972. And you're going, 35,000. That's not. I can work at McDonald's and make 35,000. No, 35,000 in 1972 was like what surgeons were making. I mean, he was making the equivalent of like $500,000 a year out of high school, because what we didn't know about him was he was a computer genius. He was a mutant. He was a total computer genius, and went from high school and was obviously made part of some program, and they just plucked him out and gave him a key position at IBM. So there are mutants among us. And I just don't think that they would be treated in the way that we see in those comics. I mean, it's like when they make movies about racial prejudice, and it's generally, white versus black, and a lot of movies set in the South in the 1960s during the integration period and the civil rights period and everything else. And there's always a character who is meant to represent, white bigotry, as if he represents the majority. But in reality, and if you know anybody from the South or you've lived in the South, you know that the situation is a lot more complex than that. that character, and that character did exist, that character who was totally intolerant, was not representative of the majority. It was far more complicated relationship between the races in the South. Still is to this day. And that character was not representative. He was an anomaly in reality. But too many times in fiction, that character, whatever the situation is extrapolated to present a flaw in an entire segment of our society. So we wind up where we are today with so many people, so many white people who hate white people because they think white people are full of hate. People that, can't look into the mirror and realize, hey, you're the one being hateful here. So, that's how we end up here. And I think things like the treatment of the mutants as an oppressed minority and that strained analogy of all of that, I don't think that's helpful. I think it helps create or perpetuate that high school view of humanity that just isn't accurate. So yeah, if I was given the X-Men, they would be like superstars. They'd be showing up on TV and talk shows, and they'd have merch. Hey, Guns of Mars is in hardcover, like a regular popularly priced hardcover. So now it's in Kindle, it's on audio, it's in a hardcover, and you missed out on the big old leather-bound edition if you had a whole bunch of money laying around. Maybe Grandma sent you for Christmas. So, but you can get the hardcover and hold a real book in your hands, or read it on Kindle, or listen to it on audio. But it is available and doing very well. I'm very pleased. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who picked this up. And really consider maybe writing another one. I wasn't before, but now I'm starting to get some ideas. So maybe by next Christmas, we might see another of my Barzoom pastiches. Anyway, that's it for this week. I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing, and I'm thanking you in advance if you accept my apology for screwing up on my own continuity. It's unforgivable, but I know you all have it in your hearts. I will see you all down the road.